This is the Tech Phantom, and welcome to episode 1 of this walkthrough. This is going to be a much different walkthrough from the last one I did. If you guys haven't checked it out, I encourage you to do so. In that build, I used a Great Scythe and I used a Dex build with a little bit of magic thrown in, so it was a little bit of a spell sword build, but with a Dex weapon. And we walked through the entire game, and it turned out that the Great Scythe is a very strong weapon, and because it is light, it allows you to increase your endurance and your vitality. And we came up with a pretty balanced, with a pretty good build at the end. And as a matter of fact, by the end of that walkthrough, I was compelled to go back and revisit my Dark Souls top 10 list. The original list was biased, I have to admit, towards strength weapons. And after having played with the Great Scythe and other Dex weapons, I felt like I had to redo the top 10 list, and I'll let you guys check out the new video and tell me what you think about that list. But I think it's a little bit more balanced. It does look at Dex weapons and strength weapons, and also some of the weapons in the downloadable content. But anyway, after the walkthrough with the Great Scythe, I went on to PvP with the Great Scythe, and PvP is a lot of fun. Now, granted, I am not the greatest PvP player. I don't really do a lot of PvP. I've started to get into it lately. And the PvP with the Great Scythe is fun. The Great Scythe does bleed pretty quickly, but you do have to be careful because it does not break poise very readily, and some of the attacks can be parried. So if you're going up against somebody that has very strong armor, has a lot of poise, and can parry pretty well, it's a little bit difficult. In PvP, I came up against some intelligence builds, some sorcery builds, and they're very tricky. They have a lot of firepower, and they can one-shot you if you don't dodge quickly enough, or if you don't have some kind of magical defense equipped, either via a miracle or through armor or a shield or something like that. And it was also at this time that there was an outcry. There was a lot of consternation, a lot of discussion in the community about Dark Souls 2. And that's because the new developers of the game had given an article, and in that article they had said that they wanted to make Dark Souls more accessible to players. And the community was very concerned because you can read into that statement that Dark Souls 2 was going to have either a lower difficulty, or even worse, based on the community backlash, that it was going to have selectable difficulty. It would have an easy mode, normal mode, hard mode. So there was a lot of discussion, a lot of angst, and there still is, about the possibility of Dark Souls having selectable difficulty levels. And Epic Namebro actually made a video about this, and he stated the case very well, very eloquently, and he said that having a selectable difficulty would give you a crutch, and it would break the appeal that the Souls players have for the game. And the appeal, one of the biggest appeals, is the sense of achievement, the sense of accomplishment that you get when you defeat an enemy, or when you get through a particularly tough area of the game, after finally, tweaking your build and equipping the right equipment and figuring out the right strategy and tactics for that particular boss or for that particular area. Well, having a difficulty mode would break that appeal because you wouldn't have that sense of accomplishment. And he also made another little bit more subtle point that said that even if you play in the hardest difficulty mode the whole time throughout the entire game, that the sense of accomplishment would be lessened because in the back of your mind you could think that there was always a safety net of being able to go to a lower difficulty if you wanted to. Whereas with the current Souls games, that's not the case at all. As a matter of fact, in Demon Souls, the opposite was true. The game actually got harder um, because of the world tendency system that was implemented, which did not make it to Dark Souls. So, it's a little bit like walking a tightrope with and without a net. If you think about the mechanics and the physical actions that you need to take, they don't really differ if you're walking a tightrope with a net or without a net. But obviously, when you're able to walk a tightrope without a net, the adrenaline flows because the risk is much higher, and the sense of accomplishment, the thrill that you get from achieving that objective, from being able to walk that tightrope, is much greater when you're not using a net. So, similar to that, the way I like to think about difficulty levels or selectable difficulty levels in Dark Souls 2 is that um, it would be like asking you to walk a tightrope and allowing you to select whether or not to have a net equipped. So, the game would provide you with that crutch, and that would, um, even if you decided to play in the hardest mode, in the back of your mind, you could always have the option of going to a lower difficulty, which would eventually decrease the thrill and the risk reward of some of the boss fights. So, um, I wanted to put this walkthrough together to show new players and probably some of the more, I don't want to say advanced, but some of the players that are very, very familiar with the game. Those of you that have played the game many times over with different builds are probably aware of this. But the game can be made easier with specific builds and with a specific strategy to walk through the game. And I decided to put a walkthrough together with the following objectives. I'm not saying that Dark Souls is an easy game, far from it. And I'm not saying that we're not going to die and we are not going to encounter situations where you are going to need a little bit of skill and you need to essentially play well to get through that portion of the game. But what I'm going to try to do in this walkthrough is to put the character in as little risk as possible and to show that even if you are new to Dark Souls, if you select the right build and if you select the right path through the game, you will be able to go into most areas and most boss fights with plenty of firepower. And by following a couple of steps, you will be able to get through the game for the most part unscathed and without as much without requiring as much skill as with some other builds. So I am going to call this walkthrough Dark Souls Easy Mode, and I've decided to use the Sorcerer in order to complete this Easy Mode a walkthrough. Now, in my opinion, and I'm going to look forward to your comments here, guys. In my opinion, the Sorcerer build, a pure Sorcerer build, can make the game easier to finish than other builds because you will eventually have very, very strong spells that can be cast quickly and that have pretty long range. So you'll be able to attack enemies and to attack the bosses from the relative safety of being fairly far apart. Now, like I've said before, I'm calling this easy mode, but as you will see in this walkthrough, it doesn't mean that you don't need to have a little bit of skill. You definitely need to think about the build and think about how to progress it forward. But the reason I'm calling it easy mode is because I'm not. This build doesn't require you to be a master at backstabs. It doesn't require you to be a master of parry and riposte. It requires a minimum amount of melee. As a matter of fact, you'll see throughout this video that in 90% of the fights, I'm going to be using my sorceries as the primary offensive weapon. I will have a secondary weapon equipped just in case I run out of spells. But we really won't have a strong weapon until the middle of the game. And we're really not going to use it because it turns out that sorceries are very, very strong. They are limited. You only get a limited number of them, but they are very, very strong. And along with some, I don't want to say tricks, but along with some equipment used to buff the sorceries, we are going to be able to do a huge amount of damage. So this particular walkthrough is for the new players, and I would very much encourage those of you that are new to Dark Souls or that have never used an intelligence build to follow along, because I think you'll have quite a bit of fun. And if you're new to the game, this build is going to allow you to experience the game and to experience the thrill of being able to complete difficult sections, because that's not going to be that's definitely going to be a part of this walkthrough. Um, but for new players, it's going to allow you to experience Dark Souls and to allow you to get better in the game, so that hopefully by the time you finish the game with this build, if you're following along, you'll be able to replay the game with additional builds or go on to NG Plus and tweak or customize your build and improve your build for NG Plus. And obviously the difficulty and level ramps up quite a bit in NG Plus because the enemies get a significant buff to both their defense and offensive capabilities. So I think this is going to be a fun walkthrough for new players. I also think this is going to be interesting for those of you that like to play with intelligence builds, or those of you that have played spell sword builds. So those of you that have dabbled in intelligence builds, if you want to see a pure maxed out intelligence build, this is what I'm going to try to make in this video, and it turns out to be very, very effective. And finally, hopefully this is going to be interesting for the mature Dark Souls players. And this is sort of my statement, my rebuttal to the Dark Souls developers. And I'm basically telling them, please don't put a selectable difficulty level in Dark Souls 2, because the challenge level in Dark Souls can be tweaked based on your build and based on how you decide to take on the game. So I'm going to call this the easy mode walkthrough. Again, not because it trivializes the game, not because it makes the game so easy that you can sleepwalk through it, but relative to how you can play the game with other builds, in my opinion, this is the safest and the easiest way through progress through Dark Souls. So I'm looking forward to your comments, guys, throughout, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy this walkthrough. Alright, so that was a very, very long introduction to the walkthrough, and I apologize for that, but I hope you understand, because this is going to be episode 1 of a multi-episode series, so we are going to have quite a number of things to talk about. So let's start talking about the specific build. So some of the rules that we're going to follow in this build is to not put ourselves at risk. It's an easy mode walkthrough, so we are not going to go online until we actually do some PvP later on, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Another thing that we're going to do is to lessen the stress of walking around with a lot of souls and having the potential to lose those souls. We are going to walk around with only the minimum amount of souls that we can. So if you just saw me, um, I just talked to the blacksmith, I believe his Rickard Vinheim, and I bought the heavy soul arrow spell for 4,000 souls, and I have soul items that I can use, and I can get many more souls because I'm going into this area here, and I'm going to try to get this Firekeeper Soul, and it's typically I would die here trying to make it through the gauntlet of ghosts. I was able to get through it. And by the way, the trick on getting through that ghost section is to line up the camera straight immediately after you pick up the Firekeeper Soul, and then walk straight through or run straight through. Don't try to go left and right, run straight through. Your character will actually bounce off of the ghost, and he'll weave in and out, and he should be able to make it. That's assuming that you were able to set up the camera and run through, and that the ghost allowed for enough space in that walkway to let your character through. So it's a little bit of a random thing, but I'm able to do it every once in a while, so I was happy to catch it on video here. All right, so like I was saying earlier, one of the rules of this walkthrough, and I don't want to say rules, but one of the things that we're going to try to do in this walkthrough is to not put ourselves at risk, and it's to not have a lot of souls. So if we don't have a lot of souls equipped, and if we need to suicide to get a specific item, or if we're just going through the game and we end up being killed, because after all, this is Dark Souls, and I will be killed many times, even in an easy mode walkthrough. Um, the stress is relieved a little bit because I don't have a lot of souls. So I'm gonna pick up a soul item here, and then I'm going to go pick up a better shield than what I have. I started with the Sorcerer, which has high intelligence and high attunement as a starting character, but the Sorcerer doesn't really have a lot of vitality, a lot of endurance, and doesn't have a good shield. So I'm going to go get a couple of shields here quickly that will give me 100% physical defense, and that are also going to give me defense for a couple of specific attacks as well. All right, so probably the most important um, rule or thing that we're going to try to do in this walkthrough is to, at the beginning of each video, we're going to have a strategic objective. And the whole video is going to be devoted towards meeting the strategic objective. So it doesn't matter how many times we die, and actually we're not going to die that much because we're also going to try to put ourselves in situations where the chances for success are high. We're going to be equipping ourselves with the right, hopefully offensive and defensive gear to give us the best capability to get through. And at the beginning of the game, we are doing a couple of suicide runs. The ghost run to get the Firekeeper Soul is a little bit of a suicide run. This is also a suicide run, picking up the Dragon Crest Shield. And I was able to dodge the swipe there, and I was able to make it through. But if you're following along, and if you died at both the ghosts and the dragon, the undead dragon, don't worry about it, no biggie. We didn't have a lot of souls, and that's the reason why we spent our souls on heavy soul arrows, so that we wouldn't have a lot of souls left over. But I gotta tell you guys, it's kind of neat. Every once in a while, I'm able to get through the ghost walkway, and every once in a while, I'm able to dodge the dragon, the undead dragon, when I pick up the dragon shield, the dragon crest shield. But I think this is the first time that I've been able to capture on video when I did both. When I was able to dodge the ghosts and dodge the dragon, the undead dragon consecutively in the same run. And it's kind of funny that I got hit by the infested barbarians there, and I almost got killed. And where that's a much easier thing to dodge, relative to dodging the ghosts or dodging the undead dragon. All right, so we're gonna continue to outfit ourselves, and we are going to go pick up a very important item for early in the game. And this is the main objective of this video, is to pick up a catalyst and to pick up the remedy spell. And both of those are located here. Here's the Mask of the Red Crimson set with the Tin Banishment Catalyst, and here's the Remedy Sorcery, which will cure you from poison and toxin. So that was the most important thing we wanted to do in this video, along with buying Heavy Soul Arrow and picking up a couple of shields. So that has been achieved, and now we have outfitted ourselves to take on the first boss. And I guess what's going to follow in the next video is it's probably the most challenging part of this walkthrough. It's easier than taking on this boss with a melee strategy early in the game, but relative to the other fights that we're gonna have in this walkthrough, it's going to be one of the more risky fights. And that's because at the base level character here, we're at level 4. We are not going to have a lot of vitality or a lot of endurance, so it's going to be very easy for us to die if we're not careful. So a couple other things on our build: we increase our strength to 10 so that we can one-hand the Tin Banishment Catalyst, and we increased our intelligence to 16, and that's going to allow us to cast Remedy. So we've outfitted in this first video, guys. What we've done is we've outfitted ourselves with the equipment that we need to take on the first boss. And actually, the Tin Banishment Catalyst can do a decent amount of damage for early in the game when you use it as an attack weapon, not when you're casting, but when you do either a one-hand or a two-hand strong attack. So that's why we've picked it up. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for this video. This is the Tech Phantom signing off.